The gleaming hull of the UES Prometheus cut through the darkness of deep space, its sensors sweeping the vast emptiness between the stars. Captain Naomi Reed stood at the command center, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. 20 years of service in the United Earth Space Force had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every nerve in her body screamed that something was wrong. "Captain, we're picking up unusual energy signatures from Sector 7, announced Lieutenant Marcus Wong, his fingers dancing across the sensor controls. "It's not matching any known civilian or military patterns." Reed straightened, her short frame tensing as she studied the readings. "Show me." The holographic display shifted, revealing a distant point of light barely visible against the backdrop of space. As the Prometheus drew closer, the image resolved into a massive cargo vessel, its hull scarred and pitted from years of hard use. But it was the energy signature that caught Reed's attention. It was deliberately scrambled, designed to avoid detection by standard scanners. "No registration beacon," reported Communications Officer Priya Sharma. "They're running dark." Reed's jaw tightened. In her experience, ships running without proper identification were either smugglers or something worse. "Bring us alongside, but maintain battle readiness. Something about this doesn't feel right." As the Prometheus closed the distance, more details became clear. The cargo vessel's hull bore the marks of recent weapons fire, and its engines were operating well below standard efficiency. Either this was an elaborate ruse, or someone had tried very hard to stop this ship from reaching its destination. "Ma'am," Wong's voice carried an edge of urgency. "I'm detecting multiple life signs aboard. Far more than a standard crew complement. And..." He paused, double-checking his readings. "The power distribution is all wrong. Most of it's being directed to the cargo holds, but it's not refrigeration or stasis systems. It's containment fields." Reed felt her blood run cold. She'd heard rumors, whispers in the darker corners of space about ships that carried living cargo. But in all her years of service, she'd never encountered one directly. Until now. "Prepare boarding teams," she ordered, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "Full tactical loadout. Lieutenant Harrison, you'll lead Alpha Team. I want eyes on that cargo hold." As her crew sprang into action, Reed activated the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is the captain. We're about to engage in a potential hostage situation. Whatever we find aboard that vessel, remember your training and remember who we are. We represent humanity, and we will act accordingly." The boarding teams assembled in the launch bay, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Lieutenant James Harrison, a veteran of countless boarding actions, ran through final equipment checks with his squad. The tension in the air was palpable. They'd all heard the rumors about slave ships, about the horrors that lay behind those sealed cargo bay doors. "Bridge to boarding teams," Reed's voice came through clear on the tactical channel. "We're detecting movement aboard the target vessel. Looks like they're trying to restart their main engines. You need to move now." The boarding shuttles launched, crossing the void between the ships in seconds. As they approached, Reed watched the tactical display, her hands clenched behind her back. This was the moment of truth. Either they'd find something routine, or they'd uncover something that would change everything. The boarding teams made contact with the target vessel's hull, cutting through the outer doors with practiced efficiency. As they breached the first compartment, Harrison's voice crackled over the comm. "Captain, you need to see this." Reed's response was immediate. "Show me." The video feed from Harrison's helmet camera appeared on the main display, and the bridge crew fell silent. The cargo hold was filled with rows upon rows of energy cells, each containing a living being. Humans, aliens, species Reed had never seen before, all packed together in conditions that made her stomach turn. "Get them out," she ordered, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Get them all out. And find me whoever's responsible for this. Humanity just declared war on slavery. As her crew moved to carry out her orders, Reed stared at the image before her, knowing that this discovery would change the course of human history. The truth had been revealed, and there would be no mercy for those who thought they could trade in living beings. Humanity had found its cause, and the slavers would soon learn just how terrible their wrath could be. The next 48 hours aboard the UES Prometheus transformed the ship into a floating hospital and refugee center. Lieutenant James Harrison stood in what had once been the ship's main recreation deck, now converted into an emergency medical ward. Around him, medical teams worked tirelessly to treat the hundreds of freed slaves they'd rescued from the cargo vessel. "How are they doing?" Harrison asked Dr. Riya Patel, the Prometheus's chief medical officer. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes after 2 days of non-stop work. "Better than expected, considering what they've been through," she replied, checking data on her tablet. "But it's not just their physical condition that concerns me. The psychological trauma." She shook her head. "Some of them have been in those cells for years." Harrison's fists clenched involuntarily. They'd managed to capture 3 members of the slave ship's crew, but the captain and several others had triggered a suicide protocol before they could be taken. The prisoners were proving difficult to interrogate, spouting propaganda about something called the Drachnid Imperium. "Lieutenant Harrison to the bridge," Captain Reed's voice came over the intercom. "Bring Dr. Patel." When they arrived, they found Reed in conference with Admiral Chen of the United Earth Defense Fleet via holographic projection. The Admiral's expression was grim as he reviewed the evidence they'd collected. "This goes deeper than we imagined," Chen said. "Your discovery wasn't an isolated incident. We've been compiling reports from across the sector, disappearances, ships running dark, unusual energy signatures. It's all part of a pattern we were too blind to see." Reed nodded. "The navigational data we recovered suggests this is just one route in an entire network. They've been operating right under our noses, using the gaps between patrol zones. And now we know why," Harrison added. "The prisoners finally broke. The Drachnid Imperium has been building this network for centuries. They see themselves as superior beings with a divine right to rule over lesser species. They've been systematically targeting developing worlds, species just beginning to reach for the stars." Admiral Chen's hologram flickered as he leaned forward. "Then it's time we showed them humanity's response to tyranny. Captain Reed, I'm authorizing the formation of Task Force Liberty. You'll have command of a fleet of 6 ships, including the Prometheus. Your mission is to locate and destroy every slave trading operation in this sector." "What about the victims?" Dr. Patel interjected. "We're already stretched thin caring for the ones we've rescued." "I've made arrangements," Chen replied. "The Centauri Medical Corps is sending hospital ships, and several Earth colonies have offered to set up refugee centers. But our first priority has to be stopping this at its source." Harrison watched as Reed studied the star chart, now marked with suspected slave trade routes. "Sir," she said to Chen, "request permission to bring in our allies on this. The Arcturus Federation has better sensor technology than we do, and the Solarian Republic's fleet could help us cover more ground." Chen nodded. "Granted. But move carefully. We don't know how deep this corruption goes, or who might be profiting from it." As the Admiral's hologram faded, Harrison turned to Reed. "Captain, there's something else. One of the rescued slaves, a Nexian named Chorus, says he can help us. He was forced to work as a navigator on several slave ships. He knows their protocols, their hidden ports." Reed's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Bring him up here. If we're going to war with an empire of slavers, we need every advantage we can get." Within hours, the Prometheus was alive with activity. Crews modified weapons systems, installed additional medical facilities, and converted cargo bays into secure holding areas for future rescues. Harrison worked with Chorus, mapping out known slave routes and identifying likely targets. The rescued slaves who were well enough to travel were transferred to the hospital ships, but many chose to stay. They wanted to fight, to prevent others from suffering as they had. Reed allowed those who were capable to join the crew in non-combat roles, recognizing that their knowledge and motivation would be invaluable. As Harrison supervised the installation of new shield generators, he caught sight of Earth through one of the viewports, a blue jewel suspended in the darkness. Humanity had fought its own battles against slavery, had nearly torn itself apart before finally abolishing the practice. Now they would take that same fight to the stars. Lieutenant, a junior officer, called out. 2 months into Task Force Liberty's operation, the UES Prometheus docked at Outpost Sigma 7, a remote station on the edge of known space. The station's corridors buzzed with activity as representatives from a dozen species gathered in secret, drawn together by humanity's open defiance of the Drachnid Imperium. Thelovix, a former slave who had become Task Force Liberty's chief intelligence analyst, stood before the assembled group in the station's main conference room. Her crystalline skin caught the light as she gestured to the holographic display showing known slave trading routes. The Drachnids never expected their victims to communicate with each other, she explained, her translator converting her harmonic speech into standard English. It was their greatest mistake. In the holds of their ships, in their labor camps, we shared stories. We learned each other's languages. We built networks. Captain Reed watched from the back of the room as Thelovix revealed the existence of an underground resistance that had operated beneath the Drachnids' notice for generations. Slaves had developed their own coded language, passed messages through subtle gestures, and maintained detailed mental maps of the Imperium's operations. Every species they enslaved added to our knowledge, Thelovix continued. The Meridian's photographic memory preserved ship layouts. The Quantari's empathic abilities let them identify sympathetic guards. Even those they considered too primitive to be worthy slaves found ways to resist. Lieutenant Harrison, standing beside Reed, leaned in close. "Ma'am, the latest intel from the Arcturus Federation just came in. They've confirmed what Thelovix is saying. Their deep space sensors have detected regular patterns of quantum fluctuations. The slaves were using the Drachnid's own containment fields to transmit messages." The revelation sent a ripple through the assembled representatives. The Drachnid's greatest weapon, their advanced containment technology, had become a tool of resistance. Reed stepped forward, taking her place at the front of the room. "What we've accomplished in 2 months proves what Thelovix and her network have known all along," she declared. "The Drachnid Imperium isn't invincible. 3 of their major transport hubs have been destroyed. 17 slave ships have been captured. Over 10,000 beings have been freed." A tall, serpentine figure rose from the assembled group, Ambassador Sithtal of the Solarian Republic. "The Republic's Council has reviewed the evidence presented by Task Force Liberty. We are prepared to commit our full fleet to this cause. The Drachnid's practice of slavery ends now." One by one, other representatives stood, pledging their support. The Arcturus Federation offered their advanced sensor technology. The Meridian Collective promised their healing technologies. Even the notoriously isolationist Quantum Concordat agreed to share their stealth systems. As the meeting continued, Dr. Patel pulled Reed aside. "Captain, we've made a breakthrough with the medical data collected from the rescued slaves. The Drachnids weren't just enslaving these people, they were experimenting on them. Testing the limits of different species' adaptability." Reed's expression darkened. "Building a database of potential weaknesses and strengths," Patel confirmed. "They were looking for traits they could use, possibly even integrate into their own species. They see themselves as the pinnacle of evolution, meant to absorb the best qualities of other races while subjugating the rest." The information added new urgency to their mission. Harrison coordinated with Thelovix's resistance contacts, mapping out a network of safe houses and escape routes that stretched across 3 sectors. The underground railroad that had once moved handfuls of escaped slaves could now support full-scale evacuations. Task Force Liberty's ships became mobile command centers for the growing resistance. Reed watched as former slaves trained alongside her crew, their determination to free their people matched by humanity's resolve to end the practice of slavery forever. The Drachnids believe they're superior, Thela Vix told Reed as they reviewed plans for their next operation. But they don't understand true strength. They see our differences as weaknesses to be exploited. They never imagined that these differences would become the foundation of their destruction. As the Prometheus prepared to leave Outpost Sigma-7, Reed received word that the Drachnid Imperium had finally acknowledged their actions, sending a message to all major powers in the sector. They demanded the return of their property and threatened severe consequences for any interference with their divine right of conquest. Reed's response was brief: "Humanity has seen your truth, and we reject it utterly. You call yourself superior beings, but you're nothing more than parasites feeding on the suffering of others. We're coming for you, and we're bringing the combined strength of every race you tried to break. Your empire of chains ends now." The message was broadcast on all frequencies, in every language spoken by the enslaved species. Across the sector, in slave camps and transport ships, in hidden resistance cells and newly formed liberation forces, the word spread like wildfire. Humanity had given voice to their defiance, and there would be no turning back. The combined fleet assembled at the edge of Drachnid space was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships of every size and design hung in the void, the sleek destroyers of the United Earth Defense Fleet, the crystalline vessels of the Meridian Collective, the bioorganic cruisers of the Solarian Republic. At their heart, the UES Prometheus led Task Force Liberty, its hull now bearing the scars of countless battles fought to reach this moment. Captain Reed stood on her bridge, reviewing the final battle plans with her command staff. The intelligence provided by Thela Vix's resistance network had proven invaluable, revealing critical weaknesses in the Drachnid defense systems. "Their arrogance is their vulnerability," Thela Vix explained, highlighting key points in the holographic display. "They never believed their slaves could comprehend their technology, so they discussed everything openly. Every override code, every emergency protocol, we memorized them all." Lieutenant Harrison pointed to a cluster of orbital platforms around the Drachnid homeworld. "These are their primary containment field generators. They use them to process new slaves, breaking their will through sustained neural pressure. If we can turn those fields back on them, we can trap them in their own cages," Reed finished. Poetic justice. "But our primary objective remains the liberation of the slave processing centers. Dr. Patel, what's the status of the medical ships?" "Ready and waiting in the secondary system," Patel reported. "We've developed treatments for most of the control implants they use. The moment the containment fields go down, we can begin helping their victims." The fleet moved into position, using the quantum stealth systems provided by the Concordat to mask their approach. The Drachnids had grown increasingly aggressive since the liberation campaign began, but they had never faced a force of this magnitude. "All ships, this is Captain Reed," she broadcast across the combined fleet. "Today we end an empire built on suffering. Every being in this fleet, whether human or alien, knows the price of freedom. Some of you have worn chains. Some have lost family to the slavers. Some simply know that to remain silent in the face of such evil is to be complicit in it." She paused, looking out at the massive fleet awaiting her command. The Drachnids believe themselves superior because they can take freedom from others. Today we prove that true strength lies in fighting to restore it. All ships, battle positions. Launch Operation Chainbreaker. The battle began with a precision strike from the Arcturus sensors, overloading the Drachnids' early warning systems. As their defense grid struggled to compensate, the first wave of ships struck. Liberation teams, led by Harrison and trained by former slaves, breached the orbital facilities. Years of gathered intelligence paid off as they moved through the stations, disabling security systems with stolen codes. The Drachnids responded with shocking violence, revealing weapons they had developed through their experiments on captive species. But the combined fleet had something stronger: the desperate courage of those fighting for their freedom and the righteous fury of those who had sworn to defend it. Thelavix coordinated the resistance cells that had infiltrated the processing centers, timing their uprisings to coincide with the external assault. Slaves turned on their guards, using their hard-won knowledge to disable control implants and containment fields. "Captain," Wong called out from his station. "They're powering up something massive near the planetary core. Energy readings are off the charts." Reed's tactical display shifted, showing a weapon of unimaginable power emerging from the planet's surface. "They're going to destroy their own world rather than surrender it," she realized. Typical of those who see others as property: if they can't own it, no one can have it. But the Drachnids had overlooked something crucial. Among their slaves had been engineers, scientists, and technicians from dozens of species. While forcing them to maintain the Empire's technology, they had never considered that their captives might understand it better than they did. "Thelavix," Reed called out. "You said your people memorized their systems. That weapon, can we hack it?" "Better," Thelavix replied, her crystalline form glowing with intensity. "We already have. For generations, we've been planting subtle changes in their code. Backdoors. Overrides. Waiting for this moment." The massive weapon turned, its energy fields redirecting to create a containment bubble around the Drachnid command centers. Their own doomsday device became their prison, trapping the Empire's leadership in a field they couldn't escape. As the battle raged on, the true strength of the unified races became clear. Each species contributed its unique abilities. Meridian healers tended to the wounded, Quantari empaths helped calm freed slaves, Solarian ships provided cover for the evacuation vessels. Humanity's role was to coordinate it all, to channel the combined might of a galaxy rising up against tyranny. The Drachnid military, faced with the imprisonment of their leadership and the collapse of their control systems, began to surrender. Some fought to the end, their belief in their own superiority outweighing their survival instinct. But most, seeing the futility of their position, laid down their arms. Reed ordered all ships to accept surrenders without condition. "We're not them," she reminded her crews. "Justice, not vengeance. They'll answer for their crimes, but under law, not lynch mobs." As the fighting wound down, Harrison led teams through the processing centers, freeing the last of the slaves. The sight of their former captors being led away in restraints, using the same containment fields they had wielded as weapons of oppression, carried its own powerful message. 1 year after the fall of the Drachnid Imperium, the UES Prometheus docked at the newly constructed Liberty Station. The massive space facility, built through the combined efforts of 20 different species, orbited a pristine world that had been designated as a sanctuary for freed slaves. Captain Reed walked through corridors that buzzed with activity, reflecting on how much had changed since that first discovery of a single slave ship. The station's central chamber had been transformed into a meeting hall for the first gathering of the Galactic Rights Council. Representatives from every species that had suffered under Drachnid rule, along with those who had joined the fight against them, assembled to ensure such atrocities would never happen again. Dr. Patel, now heading the Council's medical division, presented her findings to the Assembly. "The last of the control implants have been removed," she reported. "The healing process will take time, but we're seeing remarkable resilience across all species. Communities are rebuilding. Families separated by the slave trade are being reunited. Most importantly, the psychological scars are beginning to heal." Lieutenant Harrison, who had led many of the liberation operations, stood with Thelavix as they unveiled the memorial wall. Thousands of names scrolled across its surface, those who had died in captivity, those who had fallen fighting for freedom, and those who had lived to see liberation but couldn't overcome their wounds. The wall was programmed to speak each name in their native tongue, ensuring they would never be forgotten. "We found strength in our differences," Thela Vix addressed the assembly, her crystalline form reflecting the light of a new day. The Drachnids sought to exploit what made each species unique. Instead, those differences became the key to their defeat. Now they become the foundation of our future. The Galactic Rights Council's first act was to establish the Freedom Response Force, a multinational fleet tasked with monitoring space lanes and responding to any signs of slavery or trafficking. The force combined Arcturus sensors, Quantari stealth systems, and human tactical innovations into a powerful deterrent against anyone who might try to follow in the Drachnids' footsteps. Reed walked with Admiral Chen through the station's observatory level, watching ships from dozens of worlds move through the busy space lanes. "The Drachnids' trial begins next month," Chen informed her. "The evidence gathered by the resistance networks ensures there will be no doubt about their crimes. But we're already seeing something unexpected in their younger generations." "The changes in perspective?" Reed asked. She had heard reports about young Drachnids rejecting their species' claims of superiority, horrified by the evidence of what their empire had done. Chen nodded. "They're asking to join the rehabilitation programs, wanting to understand the species they were taught to despise. Some have even volunteered to help with the restoration of worlds their people stripped bare for resources." The station's educational center had become a hub of cultural exchange. Former slaves became teachers, sharing their species' knowledge and traditions. The Meridians taught their healing arts, the Quantari shared their empathic techniques, and humans contributed their experiences of overcoming their own dark history with slavery. Ambassador Sithtal of the Solarian Republic joined Reed as she watched a group of children, human, Meridian, Quantari, and even a few young Drachnids, learning together in one of the center's classrooms. "Your species proved something remarkable," the ambassador observed. "That the strongest chains are broken not by force alone, but by the conviction that every sentient being deserves to be free." The Prometheus was being refitted, preparing for its new role as a training vessel for the Freedom Response Force. Its crews would include members of every species, learning to work together to protect the liberty that had been won at such a high cost. "We're establishing monitoring stations along all major trade routes," Harrison reported during the Council's security briefing. "The quantum transmission network the slaves used to communicate will now serve as an early warning system. No ship will ever have to face slavers alone again." As the day's sessions concluded, Reed stood with Thela Vix in the station's garden level, a space designed to accommodate the environmental needs of multiple species. Plants from 100 worlds grew together, creating something entirely new and beautiful. "The Drachnids thought they were creating an empire," Thela Vix mused, "but they actually created the foundation for something far greater, a union of free peoples who understand the true meaning of strength." Reed watched as the station's artificial day cycle began to dim, creating a stunning twilight effect. "They never understood that taking freedom from others doesn't make you stronger," she replied. "True strength lies in defending it, even for those who are different from you. Especially for those who are different from you." The stars visible through the station's vast windows seemed brighter somehow, as if reflecting the hope of a galaxy that had faced darkness and emerged stronger. The truth had been revealed, humanity had acted, and in doing so had helped forge a new future, one where the combined strength of many species stood ready to ensure that no chains, physical or metaphorical, would ever again bind the innocent. Liberty Station's beacon pulsed steadily in the void, a constant reminder that freedom, once won, must be eternally guarded. The former empire of slaves had become a beacon of hope, proof that even the darkest night must yield to dawn.